It was a quiet afternoon when Steph heard sobs coming from the garden. When he found Cannon, 6 years old, hiding behind the oak tree crying silently, Steph wasn't prepared to discover that his own success was destroying his son's self-esteem. What Cannon said next would break any father's heart, revealing how fame can become an unexpected burden for someone who should just play and be a child. You can perceive that some of the most important moments of fatherhood arrive when we least expect them, disguised as ordinary afternoons that transform into lessons we carry forever. Steph had just arrived from Warriors practice, still feeling the adrenaline from a particularly intense playoff preparation session. As he always did, he parked in the garage and went straight to look for the children for that sacred moment of the day. The quality time that never, in 15 years of career, he had failed to prioritize. "Cannon! Riley! Ryan!" shouted Steph as he entered the house, expecting to hear the familiar sound of little feet running down the hallway to greet him with enthusiastic hugs. Riley and Ryan appeared immediately, but something was different in the house's energy. "Where's Cannon?" asked Steph, noticing the absence of his youngest son, who used to be the first to jump into his arms shouting, "Daddy's home!" "He came home from school an hour ago and went straight to the garden," said Riley, with that older sister perception that detects when something isn't right. He seemed sad, but said he wanted to be alone. Isha appeared from the kitchen, an expression of maternal concern stamped on her face. "Baby, I tried to talk to him, but he insisted everything was fine. You know how he is when he wants to process things alone." Great lessons about fatherhood often begin with an intuition, and Steph immediately felt he needed to go to Cannon. There was something in the air, a different energy that every father learns to recognize when there's a child in trouble. The Curry family's garden was a haven of tranquility, a spacious area with carefully trimmed green grass, a children's basketball hoop that Steph had installed for Cannon to practice, and a majestic century-old oak tree that had become the children's favorite place to play and imagine adventures. When Steph went out the back door, everything seemed normal at first glance. The spring afternoon was perfect. The sun filtered through the tree leaves, creating dancing shadows on the ground, and a gentle breeze carried the aroma of flowers that Isha cultivated with care. But then he heard it. Low sobs, muffled, coming from behind the oak tree. The sound that every father recognizes instantly, and that awakens every protective instinct sleeping in his heart. "Cannon?" called Steph softly, walking slowly toward the sounds of crying, as if approaching a wounded animal that might flee if startled. How is it possible that a father's heart can tighten so hard just hearing his child crying? Steph felt exactly that when he rounded the tree and saw the scene that would change his perspective on fatherhood forever. Cannon was curled up against the trunk of the tree, knees bent against his chest, small arms hugging his own legs in a position that screamed vulnerability and pain. His school uniform was dirty with earth, as if he had sat on the ground without caring about anything other than finding a place to hide his tears. The Warriors' backpack that Steph had given as a gift was thrown beside him, and the notebooks had scattered across the ground, a disorder that was completely unusual for Cannon, who had always been meticulous with his things. "Son?" said Steph, kneeling slowly beside Cannon, his voice loaded with all the tenderness a father can gather when he sees his child suffering. Cannon quickly lifted his face, trying to wipe the tears with his shirt sleeves as if he had been caught doing something wrong. His eyes were red and swollen, evidence that he had been crying longer than Steph had imagined. "Hi, Daddy," said Cannon, trying to force a smile that couldn't hide the deep sadness in his 6-year-old eyes. I was just, I was just resting here. Have you ever wondered how small children learn so early to try to hide their pain so as not to worry the adults they love? Steph immediately recognized this brave attempt by Cannon to protect him from the truth. "Cannon, son, you were crying. What happened?" asked Steph, sitting completely on the ground beside his son, not caring about the expensive suit he had worn for the post-practice interview. Cannon shook his head vigorously, as if he could make the pain disappear through denial. "It was nothing, Daddy. I'm just a little tired from school." What's most impressive is how even small children can perceive when something they say might hurt someone they love. Cannon was clearly trying to protect Steph from something, but his attempt to hide the truth only intensified the paternal concern. Steph extended his arm and gently pulled Cannon closer, feeling how the small body was tense, as if carrying a weight too great for his 6 years of age. "Champion," said Steph, using the loving nickname he had given Cannon since he was a baby. "You know you can tell Daddy anything, right? No matter what it is, we'll solve it together." For a moment, Cannon seemed to want to speak. His lips parted as if the words were on the tip of his tongue, but then he shook his head again and snuggled against his father's chest. "Can I just stay here with you for a little while, Daddy?" The simple question broke Steph's heart. There was something in the way Cannon spoke, a desperate need for comfort that went far beyond a common bad day at school. Great lessons about fatherhood often begin with an intuition. And Steph knew he needed to have patience, that forcing Cannon to speak would only make him close up even more. "Of course you can, son. You can stay here as long as you want," said Steph, hugging Cannon and feeling the boy's silent tears wetting his shirt. "Daddy's not going anywhere." They stayed like that for several minutes, father and son sitting under the century-old tree, one offering silent comfort, while the other processed a pain he still couldn't verbalize. The sun was beginning to set, creating a golden light that filtered through the leaves, and Steph could feel Cannon gradually relaxing in his arms. But he could also feel that there was an emotional storm happening inside that small body. "Cannon," said Steph softly, "you know Daddy loves you very much, right? No matter what happened today, no matter what anyone said or did, you are the most important thing in Daddy's life." It was then that Cannon raised his face, looked into his father's eyes with an expression that mixed both love and pain, and whispered the words that would make Steph question everything about how to balance fame and fatherhood. "Daddy, even if I never managed to play basketball like you?" The question came out as a whisper, but hit Steph with the force of a hurricane. In that moment, he understood that he was about to discover a truth about the unexpected costs of fame, especially when that fame creates impossible expectations for a 6-year-old child who just wanted to be loved for what he was, not for what he could become. Great lessons about fatherhood often begin with an intuition, and Steph's intuition told him he was about to learn something fundamental about how to protect his children not only from the outside world, but also from the unintended consequences of his own success. After much affection and patience, Cannon finally began to speak, revealing a pressure that Steph never imagined his 6-year-old son was carrying. It was as if an emotional dam had burst, letting escape months of silent pain that a child had tried to carry alone so as not to disappoint the father he admired above all else. The question about basketball had opened a door that Cannon had kept closed for weeks. Steph could see in his son's eyes that there was much more hidden pain, much more weight being carried by shoulders too small for so much responsibility. "Cannon," said Steph softly, adjusting his position to face his son. "Tell me what's happening. Daddy wants to understand." Cannon looked down, nervously playing with the grass with his little fingers, as if he were looking for courage in the roots of the earth to talk about something that deeply bothered him. "At school," began Cannon, his voice almost a whisper, "everyone expects me to be like you at basketball. You can perceive that some revelations come like raindrops before a storm, preparing us for something much bigger that's coming." Cannon's simple sentence carried the weight of expectations that no child should face. "What do you mean, son?" Cannon took a deep breath, as if he were preparing to tell a secret he had kept for a long time. "Every day, Daddy. Every day someone asks me if I know how to make the EBE, same shots you do. And when I miss, they laugh." Steph felt his chest tighten. In his mind, Cannon was just his little son, a child who should only be worried about playing, learning colors, and making friends. The idea that he was facing comparisons with a professional athlete at 6 years old was devastating. "Who laughs at you, Cannon?" "Tyler Brooks always says, I should know how to play basketball perfectly because you're my father," said Cannon, the words coming out faster now, as if a floodgate had opened. "And when I miss a shot in physical education class, he shouts for everyone to hear. Look there, Steph Curry's son can't even make a children's basket." What's most impressive is how children can be cruelly honest with each other, without understanding the devastating impact of their words. Steph was discovering that the fame he had built with so much effort was becoming a source of torment for his son. "And there's more, Daddy," continued Cannon, his tears starting to flow again. "Teacher Jennifer Walsh always calls me in front of the whole class when it's basketball class. She says, 'Let's see if Steph Curry's son knows how to play like his father. Show your classmates how it's done.'" Steph closed his eyes for a moment, imagining the scene. His 6-year-old son being placed at the center of attention, expected to demonstrate skills that had taken years for Steph to develop, while 20 other children watched and judged every movement. "And when I can't do what she asks, everyone gets disappointed," said Cannon, sobbing. "It's like I'm disappointing you, too, even though you're not even there." Great lessons about fatherhood often begin with an intuition, and Steph's intuition told him he had discovered only the tip of a much larger emotional iceberg. "Son, you could never disappoint me," said Steph, pulling Cannon closer. "But tell me more. What else is happening?" Cannon hesitated, as if he were deciding whether he could trust his father with the most painful part of his experience. "Sarah Mitchell always asks, 'If you're really my father,'" whispered Cannon, the words coming out like an embarrassed confession. "She says that children of famous players are born knowing how to play. And since I don't know how, maybe you're not really my father." The statement hit Steph like a punch to the stomach. A 6-year-old child was being forced to defend not only his athletic abilities, but the very legitimacy of his family. "And Marcus Williams said that if I were really your son, you would have already taught me to be good," continued Cannon, each word cutting deeper into Steph's heart. "He said you must be ashamed of me, because I can't even dribble properly." It's impossible not to feel that some childhood cruelties are born from ignorance, but cause wounds that can last a lifetime. Steph was discovering that the school children were inadvertently torturing Cannon with impossible expectations. "Yesterday, Anthony Jang challenged me to a one-on-one game in front of everyone at recess," said Cannon, his voice breaking. "He said that if I lost, it would prove that you're not a good father because you didn't teach me to play." "And what happened?" asked Steph, although he feared the answer. "I lost," whispered Cannon. "I lost badly." And everyone laughed. And Anthony said that now the whole school knows that Steph Curry is a failed father. Naturally, this leads us to a painful truth about the unexpected consequences of fame. Steph had spent his entire career being inspiration for millions, but had never considered how that same fame could become a burden for his own children. "Cannon, listen to Daddy," said Steph, gently holding his son's face between his hands. "Nothing these children are saying is true. You don't need to be good at basketball to be my son, for me to be proud of you, or to prove anything to anyone." "But Daddy," said Cannon, his big eyes full of childish confusion, "if I'm your son, why wasn't I born, knowing how to play like you?" The question revealed the devastating simplicity of childish logic. In Cannon's mind, if talents were hereditary and automatic, his lack of natural ability meant something was wrong with him or with the father-son relationship. How is it possible that a 6-year-old child is carrying the weight of proving his family identity through sports skills? Steph was understanding that he had inadvertently created a situation where his son felt obligated to be a miniature version of him to be accepted. "Every day I train secretly here in the garden before you arrive from practice, Daddy," confessed Cannon. "I keep shooting at the little basket until my arms hurt, trying to learn to make the shots you make. But I never can." The revelation that Cannon was training in secret, desperately trying to become something he wasn't to gain approval, broke Steph's heart in a way he didn't know was possible. "And you know what else makes me sad?" said Cannon, looking directly into his father's eyes. "I don't even like basketball very much. I like drawing and reading stories better. But everyone expects me to like basketball because you like it." Great lessons about fatherhood often begin with an intuition. And at that moment, Steph had the clearest intuition of his life. He had been so focused on being the best basketball player that he had forgotten to ask his son who he wanted to be when he grew up. And the answer was about to break his heart even more. But what Cannon said next was much worse than Steph could imagine, revealing a pain that went far beyond school bullying. It was an existential pain that touched the deepest core of what it means to be loved unconditionally, and that showed Steph how a 6-year-old child can interpret the adult world in devastatingly wrong ways. Cannon remained silent for a few moments after confessing that he didn't really like basketball. Steph could see that there were more things weighing on his son's heart, deeper secrets that he hadn't yet found the courage to share. "Cannon, son, is there anything else you want to tell me?" asked Steph softly, perceiving that they had reached the emotional core of all this. Cannon looked at his own hands, then at the grass, then at the tree, anywhere except into his father's eyes. It was as if he were gathering all the courage a 6-year-old child can have to ask the most frightening question of his life. "Daddy," said Cannon, his voice barely above a whisper, "can I ask you something? But promise you'll answer the truth?" "Of course, champion. You can ask anything." Cannon took a deep breath, as if he were preparing to jump off an emotional cliff, looked directly into his father's eyes, and asked the question that would break any father's heart in the world. "Daddy, do you still love me even though I'm bad at basketball?" You can perceive that there are moments in life when a simple question reveals abysses of pain we didn't even know existed. Cannon's question wasn't just about basketball, it was about conditional love, about self-worth, about whether he deserved to be loved for what he was or only for what he could become. Steph felt as if someone had torn all the air from his lungs. The question hit him with a force that left him momentarily speechless, not because he didn't know the answer, but because he couldn't believe that his 6-year-old son was questioning paternal love based on athletic ability. "Cannon," began Steph, but his voice failed. He had to stop and breathe, trying to process how he had reached the point where his own son doubted his love. "It's just that," continued Cannon, interpreting his father's silence as hesitation. "I heard Marcus Williams at school say that famous fathers only love children who are good at sports. He said that if you're not good at what your father does, he stops caring about you. What's most impressive is how children manage to absorb toxic concepts from the adult world and internalize them as absolute truths." Cannon had heard a cruel lie and had accepted it as reality, creating an emotional wound that had been growing in silence for months. "And there's something I never told you, Daddy," said Cannon, tears starting to flow again. "I listened to you talking on the phone with other players. You always talk about how LeBron James is proud of Bronny because he's good at basketball, and how Chris Paul gets happy when his son makes beautiful shots." Steph felt his heart sink even more. His casual conversations about basketball, which to him were just professional talk, had been interpreted by Cannon as evidence that paternal love depended on athletic performance. "So I thought," said Cannon, sobbing harder now, "if you only get proud of children who are good at basketball, and I'm not good, you can't be proud of me." It's impossible not to feel that some of childhood's deepest wounds are born from misunderstandings about how adult relationships work. Purinon had created a devastating childish logic. If Steph praised others for basketball, then basketball must be the condition for paternal love and pride. "And you know what else scares me, Daddy?" continued Cannon, his voice breaking. "I wake up every night thinking that one day you'll discover that I'll never be good at basketball and you'll stop loving me." The words came out like a desperate confession, as if Cannon were finally releasing a fear that tormented him in the quietest moments of the night. "I keep imagining if you'll give me to another family. A family that has children who know how to play," said Cannon. And now he was crying with an intensity that made Steph realize the depth of the emotional trauma his son had been carrying. Great lessons about fatherhood often begin with an intuition. And at that moment, Steph had the most painful intuition of his life. He had inadvertently created an environment where his son felt obligated to earn love through performance. "Cannon, look at Daddy," said Steph, trying to keep his voice steady despite his own tears that were beginning to form. "Where did you get the idea that Daddy could stop loving you?" "I heard you talking to Mommy about other players who get disappointed when their children don't follow their footsteps," said Cannon. "And I thought that if I don't follow your footsteps in basketball, you'll be disappointed with me too." The revelation hit Steph like an emotional avalanche. His private conversations with Isha about parenting pressures in public life had been misinterpreted by childish ears that caught only fragments and created a terrifying narrative. "And there's something I do every day and you don't know," confessed Cannon, looking down with shame. "I train secretly here in the garden after school, before you come home. I keep trying to make the shots you make until my arms are hurting." How is it possible that a 6-year-old child is physically hurting himself in a desperate attempt to earn love he already possessed? Steph was discovering that Cannon had transformed the family garden into a secret training ground driven by fear of abandonment. "Sometimes I cry right here when I miss too much," said Cannon, "because I know that when you come home and ask me how school was, I'll have to pretend everything's okay, because I don't want you to know that I'm a failure at basketball." "Cannon, you're not a failure at anything," said Steph, his voice choked with emotion. "But I am." "Daddy," responded Cannon with the devastating conviction of a child who had internalized a lie as truth. "I'm the only son of a famous player at school who doesn't know how to play. Everyone knows it. And I'm afraid that you'll also find out and you'll—" Cannon couldn't finish the sentence, but Steph knew exactly what he was going to say. The unspoken word hung in the air like tangible pain. "Abandon me." Naturally, this leads us to a devastating truth about how children process the adult world. Cannon had spent months living with terror that his father's love was conditional, based on performance, temporary, and dependent on his ability to live up to impossible expectations. "Daddy," said Cannon, asking the final question that summarized all his fears, "if I never manage to play basketball well, will you still want to be my father?" The question echoed in the garden like an emotional cry for help that had been whispered in silence for months. Steph understood that he was facing the most important moment of his life as a father, the moment when he needed to undo months of misunderstandings and rebuild the foundation of unconditional love that should have been unshakable from the beginning. Great lessons about fatherhood often begin with an intuition, and Steph's intuition told him that his answer would determine not only Cannon's emotional future, but would redefine forever what it meant to be the father of a child who just needed to be loved for what he was, not for what he could become. What Steph did next not only consoled Cannon, but transformed forever his understanding about fatherhood versus public fame. It was the moment when a man who had spent his entire life being admired by millions discovered that the only approval that really mattered came from a 6-year-old child who just needed to know he was loved unconditionally. Steph knelt on the garden floor, positioned himself at Cannon's eye level, gently held his son's face between his hands, and answered the most important question any father can answer in life. "Cannon, look right into Daddy's eyes. Daddy doesn't love you because you play basketball. Daddy plays basketball because he has you to love. Do you understand the difference?" The words came out with a conviction that Steph didn't even know he possessed, loaded with the absolute certainty of someone who had just discovered the most important truth of his existence. You can perceive that some moments in life force us to completely redefine our priorities, and Steph was going through exactly that transformation while looking into his son's confused and hopeful eyes. "Son, let Daddy tell you a very important secret," continued Steph, gently drying Cannon's tears with his thumbs. "You could never touch a basketball in your entire life. You could hate sports, you could want to be an artist, writer, scientist, anything, and I would still be the proudest father in the world." Cannon blinked several times, as if he were trying to process concepts that contradicted everything he had believed about paternal love. But why, Daddy?" "Because I don't love you for what you do, Cannon. I love you for who you are," said Steph, and each word carried the weight of a revelation that was changing him while he spoke. "You are kind, you're funny, you're intelligent, you're brave, you're creative, and you're my son. That will never change, no matter what happens." What's most impressive is how unconditional love can be so simple to express, but so revolutionary for someone who has never truly experienced it. Cannon was discovering that his identity didn't depend on performance. "And you know something?" said Steph, smiling for the first time since the beginning of the conversation. "I was terrible at basketball when I was your age. Horrible, really. My father had to force me to practice because I preferred playing video games. Cannon's eyes widened. Really? Really? And you know why my father never stopped loving me? Because real fathers love their children for what they are, not for what they can do. Naturally, this leads us to a fundamental truth about fatherhood. True success as a father isn't measured by the talents we develop in our children, but by the emotional security we create for them to discover who they really are. Steph stood up and extended his hand to Cannon. Come with me, son. Daddy wants to show you something. Together, they walked to the small basketball hoop that Steph had installed in the backyard. But instead of picking up a ball, Steph knelt again beside Cannon. Cannon, starting today, we're going to make a very important change. When you come home from school, we're not going to automatically practice basketball anymore. We're going to do what you want to do. If you want to draw, we'll draw. If you want to read stories, we'll read. If you want to play anything else, we'll play. Cannon's eyes lit up, as if he had just received the best gift of his life. And if I want to play basketball once in a while? Asked Cannon timidly. Then we'll play for the pure pleasure of playing together, not because you need to prove something to someone, replied Steph. But I want you to know it's totally optional. You never, ever need to play basketball to earn Daddy's love. How is it possible that a 15-minute conversation can undo months of emotional trauma? Cannon was experiencing exactly that. The feeling of liberation from expectations he should never have carried. Daddy, said Cannon, hesitant, can I teach you to draw dinosaurs? I know how to make a really cool Tyrannosaurus Rex. The simple question broke and healed Steph's heart simultaneously. His son was offering to share his true passion, his authentic identity, instead of trying to be a miniature version of his father. I would love to learn to draw dinosaurs with you, said Steph, and there was genuine emotion in his voice. Actually, that sounds much more fun than shooting balls. Cannon smiled, the first genuine smile Steph had seen in weeks. And Daddy, said Cannon, can you stop talking about basketball when other people are around? Not because I'm ashamed, but because I want people to know me for me, not as Steph Curry's son. Cannon's observation demonstrated impressive emotional wisdom for a 6-year-old child. He had identified exactly the root of the problem and was asking to be seen as an individual. Of course, son. And you know what else? In the next interview I give, I'm going to tell everyone that my son Cannon is an incredible artist who is teaching me things much more important than basketball. It's impossible not to feel that some of life's greatest victories don't happen in stadiums, but in intimate moments where we choose to love unconditionally. Steph was living exactly that victory. Great lessons about fatherhood often begin with an intuition. And in those final moments in the garden, Steph had the clearest intuition of his life. Being a father didn't mean creating a better version of himself, but meant creating an environment where his children could discover and become the best version of themselves. That night, Steph did something he had never done before. Instead of reviewing game videos or studying strategies for the next confrontation, he spent 2 hours on Cannon's bedroom floor learning to draw dinosaurs. Daddy, you're making the Triceratops wrong, laughed Cannon, patiently correcting his father's drawing. The horns are like this. See? You're a much better teacher than I imagined, said Steph. And it was completely true. Cannon was shining in a way Steph had never seen when the subject wasn't basketball. 3 weeks later, when Steph gave a post-game interview, a reporter asked about his son and family pressures in sports. My son Cannon recently taught me the most important lesson of my life, said Steph to the cameras. He taught me that being a good father has nothing to do with creating a copy of myself. It has to do with unconditionally loving the unique and incredible person he's becoming. Cannon is a fantastic artist, a brilliant storyteller, and the kindest person I know. And that makes me infinitely prouder than any shot I've ever made in my life. The interview went viral, not for sports statistics, but for the lesson about fatherhood that touched millions of parents around the world. 6 months later, Steph arrived home after practice and found Cannon in the garden again. But this time, instead of hidden tears, he found his son happily drawing in the dirt with a stick, creating elaborate dinosaur scenes. "Daddy, look at the Tyrannosaurus Rex I made!" shouted Cannon, running to hug Steph with the pure joy of a child who knew he was loved for what he was. "Incredible," said Steph, kneeling to examine his son's earth art. "Can you teach me to make one just like it?" Cannon nodded enthusiastically, and for an hour, father and son played in the garden dirt, creating a world of dinosaurs that existed only in imagination, but was more real and meaningful than any sports victory. Great lessons about fatherhood often begin with an intuition, and Steph had learned that the greatest victory of his life wouldn't be measured in championships won, but in the day when he looked into his son's eyes and saw not fear or pressure, but love, security, and the freedom to be exactly who he was born to be. Because in the end, the best trophy a father can win is the genuine smile of a son who knows he is loved unconditionally without needing to prove anything to anyone, not even to himself. Have you ever wondered what the true meaning of success in life is? Steph Curry discovered the answer in that garden. Success is raising children who feel safe to be authentically who they are, even if that means being completely different from us. And that's a lesson worth more than all the records in the world.